Hello. I wanted to make a video about how to make layout constraints programmatically for iOS, and I guess this applies to Mac OS development in some ways as well. So yeah, these are the things I wanted to talk about. Some of them might not be relevant to you, so feel free to jump to the time that you're interested in. And in general, this video will be for people who have never done constraints in code before. Maybe they've done it in Storyboards before, or maybe you've never done constraints before. But yeah, all right, let's jump right in. I actually am just going to fire up my keycaster. All right, so now you should be able to see the keys I'm holding down and the shortcuts I use. Okay, so we're going to switch to Xcode and create a new project, and I don't know why. Oh, that was the new file key command. So new project is Command Shift N, and the single view app template is pretty good. Is a pretty good place to start. If you're going to do your layout programmatically. You do get a storyboard with that. There's nothing we can really do about that. Let's not focus on that for now. So we'll call this project constraints. We'll leave everything like that and save it. Cool. And let's get the simulator all warmed up. So I'll just run that while we're chatting. So essentially, constraints are, or auto layout constraints are a way of defining the position of views on your screen without explicitly saying their X coordinate is this, their Y coordinate is that, and they have this width and this height. The way we used to do it would be to specify, so on iOS, in case you're not aware, the X-axis increases in this direction and the Y-axis increases in this direction. So that means 0, 0 is up on this corner of the screen. And so the way we used to do constraints in iOS is to specify the origin. Sorry, I said constraints. The way we used to lay out views in iOS is we'd specify the origin point, which would be an X and Y coordinate, and then we'd specify the width of the view and the height of the view. And the problem with doing it this way is that it's extremely fixed. If you're running on a bigger phone, and you've specified an X of, I don't know, 40 and a Y of 100, and the phone is actually this wide, or maybe you're on an iPad, and the iPad is taking up this much space, the view hasn't stretched in its super view. So usually you do want it to stretch because you want to support all different screen sizes. This could be a multi-line text label, so if there is more space on the screen, you want it to take less lines and, be a wider field. So yeah, using fixed positioning like that was the original way of doing things before there were many device sizes to support. And then it kind of was really hard to manage because we'd be doing things like getting the width of the screen and then adding some padding that we wanted on this side and subtracting the padding from that side and then calculating the width of the view based on that, all relative to the width of the view it is residing in, or relative to the width of its super view. And the code was just really long. So the next way that Apple sort of provided for us to make constraints or to try and have like flexible layout for views was this thing called auto resizing masks. And so if I have a view, perhaps, so I just have some view. And if I wanted to position this view with maybe a flexible width, I could say view.auto-resizing-mask equals .flexible width. And you can see here I'm getting all the options. And essentially, yeah, this was better because we could say, like in the scenario I mentioned before, if we were trying to have our view with a fixed X and Y and then the width stretching on different devices with wider screens, we could define a flexible width auto resizing mask. And in the background, that would translate to auto layout constraints. So that was one way of doing things, but it's not very flexible from a development perspective, I guess. We can't really we can't build complex layouts using the auto resizing mask. So that's still around. You can still use that. Probably hardly ever need to. The next way to lay out constraints was making constraints very, very manually in code. So you create an NS layout constraint and you would initialize it with a view that you wanted to create a constraint with, and you'd say perhaps we wanted to fix the center X, so the center of the view on the horizontal axis, the x-axis. We wanted to make that equal to the view's super view, but we still don't know what part of the super view we want the center X of this view to be equal to. So if we wanted to center it, as we were saying, then we would have to make this second attribute also center X. So the center X of this view that we're trying to lay out is equal to the center X of the view we're trying to lay out, super view. Any additional math we wanted to multiply that value by, and then a fixed offset for that constraint. And this is really long, to be honest, and it was really annoying to write constraints in this way, especially in Objective-C. So again, this is still available to use, but there is a better way. I'm just giving you a bit of a history because you will come across this if you're Googling for help when you're building constraints. You might come across a really long function name where you have to pass in all these different values, just because the internet doesn't ever delete anything when it goes out of date. And it'll work for you if you copy the example you find and put it in, but just be aware that it is kind of an outdated way of building constraints. All right, so after this this constraint creation function existed, Apple gave us a allegedly easier way of building constraints, and it involved a literal string. And you would say, so horizontally, I want my view to be a space away from the edge of the screen. Maybe I should make this bigger. So I want my view to be some space from the edge of the screen, and then the other side of the view has some padding, and then it meets the other edge of the screen. And you could adjust these spaces. I think it was something like this. If you wanted a 29, well, don't put a 29. Use even numbers. So if you wanted a 28 space from the right edge of the screen, you would create a constraint like this in this format. This was called the visual format language. And there were other functions that you would need to use to pass this string into, and you'd need to have a way of binding your variable names into strings. So notice that this is not the variable view that we had before. And then again, you'd have to create another one vertically. So if you wanted, perhaps the rule for this example that we were just looking at is we have a fixed space from the top of the screen, and then the view's height is fixed, and then we don't care how much space is below it, because the screen will grow or shrink depending on what device we're running on. The way of doing that would be to say vertically this view has some space from the top of the screen, and the view's height, because we're in the vertical axis, the view's height would be maybe 200 points, and then we would omit the constraint format for the end of the expression. And this got really difficult to read and out of hand. And I think even if you're Googling for constraints on the internet, you'll hardly ever come across visual format language examples on how to solve the problem. And also it's really nice the way you bind variables into the string names in Objective-C, but it doesn't really work in Swift as nicely. So that's kind of very outdated, more outdated than what I showed you before this. So now there is a semi-new way to create constraints in code, which is what we're going to focus on today. So that was our what are constraints and why do we use them? So because multiple screen sizes, we need to support flexible layout. So for example, in this screen, we might want a fixed width on each side of this label, and we want this field to be stretchy horizontally. Excuse me. Okay, so just to see how they look like, let's build some constraints in Storyboard. In Storyboards, because you kind of need to learn to visualize them in your head as you're writing them, and Storyboards is a great visual way of doing that. So we've got our storyboard. Cool. So say we wanted to build our example with the green view. We'll go ahead and add a view, a UIView, drop it onto the storyboard. So I'm clicking and dragging, and we'll put it there. We'll make it green so we can see it. And so, yeah, so as I was saying, in the old just origin and width and height way of doing things, if I was to run this on an iPad, you see it's bunched up in the top of the screen here, and we've got all this blank space, but really what we want to happen is have it stretched like that. So let's resolve this with some constraints. So I'm going to hold down Control and drag from the green view to the view that I'm creating a constraint to, which is this view up here. Let go, and we'll say we want the leading space equal to either the container margin, which I'm holding down Option to show these extra options, or the safe area. Safe area is actually non-existent on the horizontal axis, but as you'll see, I'll do it again going up. And if we pin the top of the view to the top safe area, you'll see that the constraint is fixed to just below the little notch on the phone here. So the safe area is defining, well, essentially what is the safe area to draw things in on your screen. I'm going to undo, and if I was to drag and hold down Option and say container margin, no, that's wrong. There is a way to get it to stick to the very top of the screen here. And I thought it was container margin, but perhaps not. Either way, we always want the safe area. And also, we're not keep duplicating it. Also, we're not going to be focusing on storyboards very much. So let's just fix the top to the safe area. And then we'll create a fixed space on this side of the view rather than giving it a width. So I'll drag and say trailing space to safe area. And let's check what this width happens to be. So I'll just click on the constraints. Very finicky, and I think because I'm in zoomed mode, it's even more finicky. Very frustrating. So I'm just going to open it up here and just click around until I find the one I want. So yeah, so now that's highlighted. I can see up here that the constant of that constraint. So it doesn't know if it's a width or height because it just doesn't, but it knows that it has some constant, and that constant is 47. So let's make it 20, and then we'll make this, which I managed to click on, this constraint equal to 20 as well. You'll see there's still an error appearing, and that's because everything needs to kind of add up on the horizontal axis and the vertical axis to create an intrinsic size, or maybe not an intrinsic size, but to create an unambiguous size for the view that you're trying to lay out. So currently we haven't given it a height, and I think this is probably figured out that we haven't given it a height. Yeah, it's very hard. Maybe there you go. Needs constraint for height. Yeah, so iOS doesn't know how tall to make this view because we haven't given it a height constraint. So to give it a fixed height, I'm just going to right click and drag to itself, or I can control, because holding down control and clicking is the same as right click, and then I get this this option here for height, and then we can hopefully click on that constraint and make it however tall we want that view to be. So now when I run the app on an iPad, you can see that the view is nicely being stretched, and this safe area constraint is now pinned to the very top of the screen as opposed to below the notch, and that's just iOS trying to figure out the best way to do things. So that's the very basics of constraints and what they do. Okay, where's my preview? All right, so why wouldn't we use storyboards? Essentially, when you're working with other developers, you're merging code, and we might talk about Git at some stage and how to work with other people and ensure that when you make changes in a file, you don't overwrite their changes that they've made to the file. But with storyboards, because it's this visual format here, it's very hard to display, hey, someone else has edited this file. You've added a constraint here, and they've added a width constraint. How do we resolve that? And the reason being is that internally, the storyboard file looks like this. So, I mean, we can try and figure out what everything means. Okay, well, that's a background color. This is our height of 200, but it's very confusing. And yeah, maybe when someone has gone and set the width of a view, and we've set the leading margin of the view to the super view, if those two lines of XML appear in the same location on the file, just because the two Xcodes that you're both working on have placed it there, it's going to be really difficult to read this format and sort of kind of resolve the constraints in a way that mean your view will still work. So that's one reason for not using storyboards. Another reason is reusability. Let me go back to the normal view. So imagine that this green view is a little bit complex, and perhaps it's got a label inside it somewhere. I don't know, we could center that label. So we'll give it a center horizontally in container, and we'll right-click drag and give it a center vertically in container. Yeah, so say we've got a label there and we've got some other elements, and maybe we want to reuse this view on another screen in the app because it is the profile view. It shows the details of the currently logged in user for some reason. With a storyboard, yeah, you could copy this view and paste it into the other view controller, but then you'd have to go and create all your IB outlets again. And if you edited one, it wouldn't change in the other one. And if you generally want to keep things consistent in your apps, so that's not possible with storyboards directly. There is something called nibs, and that is actually spelled XIB. So it's an XIB file, and in the nib you can define a reusable view, but there's actually still no way to load that view easily into a storyboard using this visual layout. So you'd have to do it in constraints anyway, and there's other pitfalls to working with nibs as well. So yeah, reusability is a really important one for why we would do our constraints in code. Another reason is, for example, we've gone and changed this margin to 20, and we've made this other margin 20, and we generally want things to look even like this. With the storyboard, there's no way to kind of define a constant that gets used everywhere. So 20 might be a global pixel spacing that our designers have defined for everywhere in the app. We couldn't go and put a variable here that makes everything 20, so that in the future, when designers say, actually, we wanted 24 pixel borders, it looks better, we'd have to go and click on every constraint and manually update that value. And if we missed one, there'll be hell to pay. So that's another reason why we might not use storyboards. Okay, so let's jump into an example of how to I guess we can recreate that view that we just made in code. Just taking my jumper off because the sun is coming in. All right, so we've got our view controller, and we've got our viewDidLoad function, which is called, theoretically, is called only once for the life cycle of our view controller. So let's create a function called layout, and in here we'll build all our constraints, and we'll build our views to an extent as well. And so from our viewDidLoad, we'll call layout. Now, you only want to create your constraints once. You could create them again and again, and if they're the same every time, it's actually kind of safe to do that, but it's also unneeded, and it's probably going to result in more computation cycles for UIKit as it tries to figure out what you mean with your constraints. So yeah, generally, whatever function you want to put, you want to write your constraints in and activate them in, just make sure that that function is called from a function that is only going to be run once, I guess, such as viewDidLoad. You could do it in a init, which we'll get to later on in the video, but for now, let's call it from viewDidLoad. So, all right. So, how do we position our view on the screen like we had it in the storyboard? So let's create the view. Let's hold on to the view up here. So we'll say green view is a UI view, and maybe we'll create a setup function where we do some styling. Maybe we'll call it style. So we'll call style before layout, and in style we'll say green view dot background color is equal to the system green color, which I think is what we chose before. Okay, so we've set the background color of our view. And now we need to add that view into the view controller's view. So remember in our storyboard, we've got a view here that we always get for free when we drag in a view controller. This view is represented as just simply view inside of our code. And so that's where we have to add all our views that we want to appear on the screen. All right, so we've got our view. We're going to say view.add subview, green view. So now our green view is in the screen, which is the same as when we went up to the plus button and dragged it into the storyboard. So we only want to do that once. That's why it's in our layout function. All right, so now we start defining the position on the screen in relative terms. So to do that, we need to create constraints and activate those constraints. So maybe we want to set the left inset or margin first. So we would create a constraint by saying, green view dot leading anchor dot constraint equal to the view dot leading anchor. So we're constraining the leading anchor of the green view to the super view's leading anchor. And this function is actually returning a constraint. And if I option click, we can see that the type is NSLayout constraint. So this is a really shorthand way of doing that old style long function that we saw earlier. NSLayout constraint dot what was it? It was the init function. It's just using some properties that Apple have recently added to views to sort of figure out what you mean, rather than having to explicitly say, yeah, this will, I guess we could write it again here. We could say the green view leading is equal to the view leading, and then we'd have to pass in, multiply should be 1. Yeah, so this is a really nice way of doing that. And as I said before, we do need to activate that constraint. So we would say leading constraint dot is active equals true. And now that constraint is going to be computed by UIKit, and it's going to result in the position of the green view being changed on the screen. This setting active to true is apparently inefficient, Apple tells us. We don't get to see the source code of it. I don't remember where they say it's inefficient, but generally we know as developers that it is inefficient. So we want to activate a bunch of constraints at once. So we want to build all our constraints. So this is a kind of like a way of building a constraint, and then activate them all at once. And to do that all at once, we have a handy function on NSLayout constraint called activate, and it takes an array like that, an array of constraints. So we can just whack in our variable that's holding that constraint like that, and then we can perhaps we have a bunch more. We can activate them all at once by putting them inside of the array like that. And actually, at this point, there's no need to sort of store this constraint into a variable and then put it start listing variables here. We may as well refactor our code, grab this one, and put it straight in the array. So this is generally how your constraints are going to look. So let's build the top anchor constraint. We'll say green view dot top anchor constraint equal to the view dot, I think there's a safe area, layout guide dot top anchor. And so that's going to make sure that the view is stuck below the notch. And we do need to put some commas here because we are listing items in an array. And then again, we'll define the, well, let's just define the width, a constraint equal to constant. So we'll give this green view a constant width of 200 points, and we'll give it a height equal to 200 points as well, just for now. And we'll run that. And there will be an issue, and I'm showing you what the issue is because you'll see this issue for the rest of your iOS career, and I see it all the time because I forget to do this step. Yeah, it looks like this. It's kind of hard to read, I guess, but there is usually some hint. So it's saying if you're seeing constraints that you don't understand, refer to the documentation for translates auto resizing masks to constraints. So this goes back to what I said at the beginning of this video about the view having an auto resizing mask that sets up constraints for you. Essentially, when we're going to start building constraints ourselves, we need to tell UIKit and iOS to stop looking at whatever is stored inside this property and stop converting this into constraints, because it's going to conflict with the constraints that we're writing. So to do that, and it's really annoying, but we do have to do it, we need to say greenView.translates auto resizing mask into constraints, false. So now it's not going to go and look at that value and essentially do something like this in the background based on what it finds inside of that value. So we'll run this again. And there we go, we've got our green view, and it is fixed to the edge here. That's because I've forgotten to give it our constant of 22. So to do that, we'll just insert a comma here, and there's an optional argument to this function called constant, and we'll give it the value 22. We'll hit run again. And it's as easy as that. Now our green view has been pushed in by 22 points. Now, in our example, we did want the other side of the screen to have the same constant. So we can go ahead and see what happens when we make this width, instead of being equal to a constant, we'll make it equal to the view.trailing anchor with a constant of 22, which would make sense, right? Whoops, what has gone wrong? Because this needs to be trailing 2. Yep, so it would make sense that we could say give the view a 22 point constant on the other side. But as you can see, it looks like nothing has happened. So when something like this goes wrong, we can try and take a look at the view hierarchy using this button down here. So we can see our app in 3D, and we can expand that out if we've got a bunch of complex views happening in here. This is a really good way to take a peek at what's going on behind the scenes. So this is our ViewController's view, and its width is 812. Okay, and we've given it an inset of 22. So let's keep tab of this, 812 minus 22. And then remember, we wanted the green view to have a space of 22 on the other side as well. So it should subtract 22 again, and the width of our green view should really be 768 points. So I'm going to click on the green view, and we'll check the width, and it's actually 375 points wide. Am I doing that correctly? Did I choose the wrong value for this? So the ViewController's view is 375, and this view is 375. Is it because that's very strange, isn't it? Why would that be the case? All right, well, I don't think I'm going crazy here. Xcode is telling me these views have the same width. Oh, of course they do. That's the whole problem to begin with. Yeah, so these views have the same width. Xcode is not lying to me. We just can't tell because the rendering is only showing up to here. But essentially, this green view is extended like 22 pixels off the edge of the screen. That was silly of me. Yeah. So it's off the edge of the screen, and that's because our trailing constraint constant of 22 is actually adding 22 pixels in this direction because our constants, I guess we should think of them as always working from the first item to the second item. So let's take a look at our first items and second items. So this green view is the first item, or the leading anchor is the first item, and it creates a 22 pixel distance from here to here. So now we're trying to give it a 22 pixel distance from the trailing to the trailing. I don't know if this is the best way of explaining it. But essentially, yeah, when we're going trailings on the other side of the screen, we need a negative distance. So maybe I'm wrong here. Maybe it is computing a distance from the super view into the... No, it's not, is it? Because I'll show you something. What we can do, oops. If we were to swap view and green view, I think we'd get our desired result. Yeah, so that's what we want, right? But I don't really like this. You know, it's hard to tell that this constraint is actually a green view constraint. So let's keep it in with the green view out the front here, and just give this a negative constant so that it gives you a value in the opposite direction. And I've taken that too far. I've undone too far there. And so this is the result that we want. Yeah, so rule of thumb, I guess, is on the trailing edge, you want to give it a negative constant. So now remember we were talking about reusability and reusing this point value so that in the future, if we want to change it, we can change it everywhere. So a good way to do this is to simply create a metrics structure where we can store values that we reuse. So static let, what we'll call it, horizontal padding is 22, and that means that well, yeah, we can say metrics dot horizontal padding here, and negative metrics dot horizontal padding. So that'll give us the same result. Yep, and so the benefit of this is when the designer comes and says, actually, we wanted a 28 pixel padding for these views, we can just go and change that one value, and it's further in now. And if we rotate the device, you can see that it is stretching very nicely. So I guess that's a simple example of how you might create constraints.
I don't know what you mean by, so I guess that's a simple.
So apparently Siri on my watch somehow got triggered. That's all right. Yeah, so that's an example of how to do a simple constraint. Thanks, Siri. Okay, so another way to do this layout would be to fix the greenView.centerX anchor, make a constraint equal to the view's centerX anchor. And now we can remove this trailing constraint. So what's going to happen is this. Exactly the same thing. So what's happening here is, let me get my drawing app out and give it something more visible. We've got a constraint of 28 points here. And we've told the center X, so remember X is in this direction, so that means the center X line is here. So we've said for the center X of the green view to be equal to the center X of the view controller's view, which imagine that, well, actually I can just draw them on top of each other, like so. So it's aligned those two X's, those two X-axis values together. It's given us a padding in front of the view, so that means that this space and this space, they have to be the same. iOS can just figure that out based on the rule that we've given it about the two X-axes being aligned and there being a constant padding on this side. So that's I guess a demonstration of the power of constraints. You don't have to say everything about your view. You can just say some things and you'll figure out what you mean. Sometimes I do see that this happens. You do both. You align the center X to the view's X and you give it a trailing anchor, which is absolutely fine. There's going to be no warnings in the console about that, well, unless they've added some. No, there's no warnings. The layout looks perfect. Everything stretches nicely. But the problem is it's just an extra computation for iOS. There's no need to tell it the same thing. So either choose one or the other, but not both. And I actually like this one personally, because it means that I don't have to repeat myself about the constant and I don't have to remember to use a negative value here. But I do agree when people tell me that this is a bit more confusing to read than having explicitly said what the trailing anchor is. So it's up to you and who you're working with, I guess, on how you lay out your views to have equal padding on either side of them. All right, so what was the next thing on our list of things to talk about? A more advanced tutorial on how to create a login screen, kind of like this one. So yeah, we can go ahead and start building that basic layout. Right, so I am going to delete the green view. Will we keep our style function? Yeah, why not? And we'll keep our layout constraints activate like so, because that'll be useful to us. So what's the first thing we need to do here? Probably position this welcome label up near the top of the screen. So let's create a label. Now, maybe the style function could end up quite long. So let's look at using a setup closure for defining what our view will look like beforehand. So we'll call this the title label, and it's of type UI label, and it's equal to, oops, a closure. So some block of code, a function essentially that we call, and then whatever this function returns, we're going to store in the title label property of the view controller. So now we can just say let label is UI label and return the label. So remember, because we're using constraints, we have to say label dot translates into auto resizing masks is false. And let's give it a text value of welcome, like we see in the design. And perhaps we'll give it a font size too. Or we can just say .system font of size. What do you think it looks like? Ooh, maybe 35. Cool. So let's add that label to the view hierarchy using add subview. We've already translated the auto resizing masks to false, so we're ready to start making constraints. So we'll just say title label dot leading anchor constraint equal, oops, there's many options here by the way, which we'll explore some of them as we go on. So we'll make a constraint equal to the view's leading anchor, and the constant will be metrics dot horizontal padding. Note that there is actually a left and right anchor available that you can use instead of leading and trailing. The reason for leading and trailing is for languages that read right to left. So maybe, I guess, Arabic is the first example that comes to mind, I think. Yeah, that would mean that everything is flipped. So you would want your label to be fixed to this side of the view instead of this side. So that's why leading and trailing is useful, because iOS will flip them for you when it comes across a device running the flipped locale. So yeah, it's good practice to use leading and trailing. You don't have to. You can force it to stick to the left by using left anchor instead of leading. It's just nice for the users if everything was aligned to the right when they're in a language that reads from the right. Okay, so we've created our leading anchor, and now let's create our top anchor. Okay, constraint equal to, perhaps equal to the views safe area layout guide dot top. How do we want to define this padding up here? I'm just going to put in 100 points for now. Cool. And actually, you'll find that we can run this code right now. Our device is still landscape. And that's what it looks like. And the reason for that is labels and many other UI elements, they have an intrinsic content size. They have a natural size that they are based on the content inside of them. So you can see here in our View Debugger button that the label, it has a width and a height based on its content. So that width and height is very, very nice and flush. Well, not vertically, but it is reasonably flush with the content. So that's really handy if you want a label that could become multi-line at some stage, and you can't decide on what its width or height should be. You can just let it grow and shrink based on its content size. But let's see what happens when we change the length of this label to our cool application. And if we want our label to support multi-line text, we should specify the number of lines to be 0, and that'll mean the label can grow to be an infinite number of lines. So our label is now being clipped by the side of the screen. In landscape, it looks great because landscape is essentially a really wide screen, but in portrait, it's being clipped. So I guess most of the time what I'm saying is we do want to set a trailing constraint, even if we can't see that constraint in the design, because we might support multiple languages in the future and words will be longer or shorter in different languages, or design could tell us to change the text in our app or even things like accessibility sizes set in settings for people who have trouble reading small text. If our app is supporting dynamically sized text, we want to ensure that our constraints are defined in such a way that this doesn't happen, which would be very annoying for the user. And we can just take a peek at the frame of the label. And I promise that it's not lying to us. The width is 486, so that label is shooting off out into the void over there. Cool. So let's give it a trailing constraint. So we'll. I'm a fan of just double-clicking a line, copying and then pasting twice to duplicate it. So it's very fast. Let's see my shortcuts, and then just changing this to trailing and trailing. And remember, we want to give that a negative constant. So now, oh, yeah, okay. So now our label is wrapping nicely. We can see that the height of the label is quite, well, it's double the height of what it was before because it's fitting in 2 lines. And if we were to jump over to landscape, because we're paused now, so we need to play again. If we were to jump into landscape, we would see that our label is on 1 line again. So I guess that's a good way of testing how things look on different screens. That's really fine, to be honest, to do it this way. But I guess sometimes it's not fine. So let's take a look at what do I want to do? We want to make this shorter first, and we want to run the app. So our label looks like this, but remember we've given it a trailing anchor. So what's happening now is our label, because of the text alignment set in the label is left, the welcome text is nicely aligned to the left of the label. But we've got all this blank space here to the right of the text. And that's fine, but if you were in a really complex screen with many, many labels, perhaps, and maybe you had a table view with cells, hundreds of cells, and each cell had 3 labels, you might find that when you're scrolling the table, you're not getting a very smooth frame rate. It's choppy, and that's because labels are transparent. So you see there's no background to this label. We can see through it. So when iOS comes across something transparent, it has to do extra work to draw it on the screen because it has to draw the label. I think it draws the label first, and then it knows that there's transparency. So then it has to go and find out what view is behind that label, so which is the white background, which is green now that I've turned on color blended layers. It has to figure out, what view's behind it and then draw that view in the transparent area. So what this red is indicating in color blended layers is areas of the app that are transparent, and iOS has had to do extra work to draw the pixels in that area. So when you're in a table and you're scrolling and there's lots of transparency, because scrolling takes a lot of redraw cycles, you can really feel that transparency, that the work that the processor is doing when it hits those transparent labels. So we could set a background to this label. We could give it a white background, like so. And this would show up green because it's not having to draw any transparency. But what this does mean is if we needed transparency, perhaps there was some nice pattern background of our app, or if our scrolling went underneath the label would just appear as a white block, which is generally what we don't want. So we can make a trade-off and say, we'll allow the nice design with the fancy background, And to make it more efficient on our end, we won't give it a trailing anchor that's always equal to the SuperView's trailing anchor with this constant. We'll make it, I think, greater than or equal to is what we want. Greater than or equal to the trailing anchors of the SuperView with this constant. Let's give that a go. What's happened? Should I have said less than or equal to? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so less than or equal to the view's trailing anchor. So now you can see that our label is it looks like it's just fixed its width to the intrinsic size of the label like we saw before. And if we were to start adding text to the label, it would grow. But if we added too much text, then our label, it stops when it reaches that that padding and then drops down to a new line. So this less than or equal to function builder for constraints is really handy way of keeping things efficient and also allowing transparency, because our label was much smaller before and it only grows if it needs to grow. There's less useless transparency on the screen. So yeah, that's another function, and less than or equal to can of course be used for more things. Like you could give the height of a view to be less than or equal to something, which would mean the view would be allowed to grow until it reached a certain point, and then the constraint would kick in and stop it from growing any further. Yeah, so that's our title label done, I think. We'll change it back to welcome to match the design. All right. What else have we got? We have a username label and a text field and a password label and text field. So let's create our title label. Cool. And well, I guess I'll just grab these lines. We'll ensure that we're setting the translation auto resizing mask off, and we'll say username, and we'll grab this again, and we'll call this the password field. So you can see it's getting a bit repetitive. There are ways to clean this up. This will be the username field itself, which would be a UI text field. And this will be field. And we'll just remove that for now. So we do also, of course, need to tell the field to be to not have auto resizing constraints. And this will be our password field. Cool. So now I recommend we break this up nicely for the next person who has to read our code. So this will be title label constraints. Don't leave more than one blank line in a row. And this will be our username constraints. So we'll use this section here to do both the constraints for our username field title and our username field. All right, so our title is going to look like, well, what are we missing? We're missing view.addSubView username field title. u.headsubview username field. We'll start with that. So we'll make our title. It gets difficult deciding how we want to lay things out here. Do we want to give it a fixed space here? Is there some imaginary center point here that the views are anchored to? Let's assume for now that this is the center of the device, which it might not be. And we'll fix the bottom of the username field to this center line, this center Y line. So username field dot bottom anchor, we'll make a constraint equal to the views center Y anchor, and we don't need a constant. So that's kind of fine. Xcode's not complaining. We need the username field to have a padding on each side, and it's a different padding. So I'll call it big horizontal padding. Maybe it's 44 points. I'm not sure. Find out. And essentially we need this line of code, but for the username field, and we want to use our big padding. And we'll need this again for the trailing anchor, like so. And do text fields have an intrinsic height? Let's find out, because we haven't given it a height anchor. We have no complaints in the console, but we can't see anything on the screen. So let's have a look in our view debugger. And we can see that our text field is here. I can immediately see that it's flush with the side of the screen, or perhaps going off the screen, which probably means I've forgotten to do my negative constraint again, which I have. So this should have been negative. And it appears that, yeah, I think iOS changed the text field style. I used to really like that old sort of shadowed text field style where you could immediately tell where it was. Yeah, rounded rect. That sounds like what we want. So let's set the fields border style to be rounded rect. And I'm going to assume that I'm correct, so do it here too. That's a bit better. So now our text field is appearing, and the bottom anchor, remember. So let's take a look at it. Our bottom anchor of the text field is equal to the halfway mark of the screen. Oops. Yeah, so bottom anchor, and then the screen's halfway point, which would mean that this distance and this distance is equal. Okay, so that's looking all right. So let's lay out the label, the title for this field above it. So we can say username field title dot bottom anchor is a constraint equal to the username field dot top anchor, right? The bottom, let's have a look if that makes sense. So the bottom of this title label is equal to the top of the text field. That makes sense. And we'll need some sort of constant. And we'll just call this vertical padding. We'll make it equal to 4 points, maybe. And so that distance will be metrics dot vertical padding. So we're reusing all our values, which I haven't done here, but that's okay. So yeah, our field is stuck to the top of the username field. Now our title, username field title here needs a left and a right anchor as well. And we could do something like this if we wanted to. We could just grab the exact same leading and trailing logic and apply it to the username field and sorry, the username field title. I should rename this variable, it's confusing. And that's what's happened there. Our 4-point constant is not looking correct, is it? Let's have a look. In fact, can you see what's happened? This is our username field label, and it is actually the bottom, which we expected to be 4 points above the field, because that's the rule we thought we wrote. It's actually 4 points below. If we look at it from the side, you can see here that it's below. So you know what's happened? We need to do negative when we're going when we're doing constraints at the bottom of things. And yeah, I mean, even I'm not used to it, I guess. Maybe we'll talk a bit later about why. But yeah, so at the top, we're fine to use positive values, and at the left, we're fine to use positive values. But when we're building constraints, often we'll need to use negative values for the bottom and for the trailing. So we've fixed up our bottom. What was the other problem we had with our? I don't think there was one. So let's run this again. And now we've got our beautiful 4-point spacing plus that extra size that is given to labels when they're assigned their intrinsic size. And I think it's to do with the line height of the font that you're using, this space here. But yeah, we've got our nice spacing. Our label is taking up the same width of the text field. So if the label was too long, it would stop here. I don't know if there's a language where the word username is longer than this width. But there are two things we can do to make this even better. So remember we said that we should try and reduce transparency on the screen. So we could convert this trailing anchor to be a less than or equal to anchor, so that our label is not stretching out, because we don't need it to stretch all the way. Let's take a look if that worked. Yes, it did. So now our label is nicely, efficiently positioned over here. The other thing we can do is, yeah, it's absolutely fine to keep repeating these constants like so, but what if we were to move this username field to another position on screen? Perhaps for some reason there's a sidebar menu, so when we click here, this whole screen or some of the content on the screen moves over, and then the menu appears. We would need to apply that movement animation to both the username field and the username title. I'm going to rename that variable, and the username field. Yes. So what we can do instead of giving the field title these constants again, we can just make it equal to the element above it or below it at this stage. So we've given it a very nice. We're happy with the rule we've used for the text field here. So let's make this username, rather than aligned to the super view with a space, let's align it with this text field. So we'll say the leading anchor is not equal to the view's leading anchor anymore. It's equal to the username field's leading anchor. And now we don't need to say the constant. Well, let's leave the constant in and see what happens actually. Yep, so now we've got our constant here because we've aligned this label to the leading of the field. So we can make our code neater by removing the constant and doing relative layout. And the same goes for the trailing. We can just make it equal to the field rather than to the super view and remove the constant. So this should look exactly the same. It just means that if one day we do move this field around, the label is going to come with it. So yeah, I mean, I guess in this case, I haven't built the constraints top down, and we can actually just rearrange these if we want to. I like to, when I'm building constraints, to have them relative to the view above them, if it makes sense to do so, rather than always defining, always passing in that constant padding. All right, so that's our username field. So again, we can, so I did promise we'd rename this variable. So I'm going to do that. I'm just going to call it username title before things get out of hand. And I'm going to call this other one title as well. Oops. So now we can pretty much grab this code again and paste it and now adjust it for the password. So I'm going to grab these two as well. And we're just going to change username to password. Yeah, see, I'm cleaning up as I go, don't leave double spacings. Okay, so now I've got this handy for copying and pasting. I've got this one handy for copying and pasting. And we also need to plug that one in here because we're doing relative layout. And what happens if I run this? Well, we haven't actually changed any of the constraints. We've just placed it in the exact same position that the other field was in. So you can see that now there are actually two fields on top of each other. And these two labels are on top of each other. And some of these other views are just internal things that Apple is using inside of the text field. So you can see here, that's the actual text field. Cool, so we don't want that. What we want is we want the password. Let's have a look at our design. We want the top of the password to be some padding, some spacing from the bottom of the username field. So we can define that very easily. So instead of saying the password field's bottom anchor is fixed to the view center, we'll delete that. And we can say that the password title top anchor is a constraint. Come on, give me a good one. Equal to the username field's bottom anchor with a constant. And for now, you know that we should be reusing our metrics. So I'm just going to put in 50 points, like so, and put a comma, of course. Cool. So yeah, the password's top is equal to the bottom of the username field. The bottom of the password title is equal to the field's top, and that's now getting confusing to read. Why are we setting it like this when we could make it a bit clearer by saying password field dot top anchor dot equal to, oh sorry, constraint equal to the password title dot bottom anchor, and with this constant. And now, because we're going the other direction, we don't need to use the negative. So essentially this line 86, and line 90 should be doing the same thing. It's just saying it in a different way. And I think in the case here, it's actually clearer to say it this way, because now we've got a little block of lines of code that is related to the password field, and it's all relative to the view geographically above it on the screen. So we can delete this line. And you know what? I think that this one here, it might be worth rewriting it to be the same as this. So I'm going to replace it and say that the username field is actually equal to the titles top anchor, bottom anchor with a positive vertical spacing. And there you have it. We've got our layout starting to look very nice. And we haven't really thought much about horizontal. You can see how it resizes with keeping the constant space at the top. We didn't define any rules around how that should work, but it's almost there. It's almost figuring it out. You can imagine how on an iPad it would still look reasonably nice, I guess, or on a smaller device. Well, that doesn't actually resize the devices, but if we were to run it on on something smaller or bigger, it would still look nice. And remember when we looked at the storyboard code behind the scenes, open as source code, this is much clearer to read than all of this. You know, I don't even know what that's related to. It's something up there. Cool. So that's our, we're almost there. Yeah, we could put a button in down the bottom. Let's do that. All right, I just took a quick break because I didn't realize how long I had been talking for, and I needed to fill up my cup here. Okay, so where were we? We were taking a look at adding a button. All right, so to do that, we'll create another little setup closure. We'll just use this as a basis. And we'll make it a UI button. And it, when we create a button, if we want the nice touchdown effect, so like how it fades a bit when we have our finger pressed on it, we should create it using this type init and give it the type system. And we'll rename that to button. And that doesn't apply. And this, of course, should be we'll call it the login button. And yeah, we should give it a label so we can see it. Set title is login for state normal. Cool. And of course, add it to the view hierarchy. All right, so now our button has a bit of a different rule. It appears to have a fixed width and a fixed height, and to be centered horizontally. So let's do that. And we should start to neaten up our code a bit. Password constraints, login button. So we'll say login button. The width anchor is just equal to a constant of, I don't know, 200. And we'll give it a height anchor too. And that height anchor will be 60 points. Now we can start defining where it is on the screen. So we know we want it to be centered horizontally. So that'll be login button dot center x anchor is a constraint equal to the views center x anchors. We've done that before today. And the top of the button is equal to, why does x get indent like that? Is equal to the bottom of the view above it with a constant. So the view above it is the password field. And the constant, if you remember, we've used this constant before. I think it was the vertical padding, wasn't it? No, it was this. See, now we've run into an instance where we should be using the metrics struct because we're repeating ourselves. But let's just move on. So we'll give this a run. Cool, and our login button is appearing there. And yeah, it's not rounded like in the design, and I think doing things like that is out of the scope of this tutorial. But it's good to keep your buttons, if they're kind of very small and just a label, bigger than the text, and that's because it's much easier to press. So the button is here, and I can actually, press down, click here if I want to. And if you have fat fingers, it can be hard to press. Like I always have trouble with the little pluses up in the top corner. So yeah, it's good to keep a tappable region bigger than the text if it's not clear where the button is on the screen. So that was really easy. We've inserted our login button. And now what happens if you want to fix a view to the bottom of the screen? Well, let's do just that. So we'll create a, now you'd have to use a button. In fact, yeah, we can use a button. Don't listen to me. What did I say? No, I've lost my read our privacy policy. We'll call this the policy button. Read our privacy policy, because everything needs a privacy policy. Cool, and we're happy with that setup. And we will, just for the sake of time, we'll use the intrinsic size of the button. Policy button, and we'll center it, because it looks, actually, you know what? We're going to run into a problem if we center it. What if the text is too long? It's gonna get pushed off the sides of the screen. Oh, we can demonstrate that. Why not? So we've got our privacy button. No. Policy button is a policy button, not privacy button. See, variable naming is confusing. Equal to the center X anchor of everything, and we will make the bottom of the policy button equal to, where's my equal to, this one, equal to the view's safe area insets, not insets, guide, dot top. No, the top will be the top of the screen, so the bottom safe area. And let's forget about the constant for now. Cool, so what's going to happen here? We are crashing, unable to activate constraint with anchors. Usually we get a bit more information than that. There we go. So terminating app due to uncaught exception, NS generic exception, unable to activate constraint with anchors, this thing, because they have no common ancestor. Believe it or not, I did this on purpose. Believe me, I swear I did this on purpose. It's because we've forgotten to add it to the view hierarchy. So that's the kind of message you can expect. But remember, I had to press this play button before we got that message in the console. It was kind of confusing before. But yeah, this is what you'll see if you've forgotten to add the view to the hierarchy, or if you're creating a constraint between two views that are in different hierarchies. So perhaps you had a label inside the text field, not on top, but like inside the view, and you tried to make it equal to the button's top. That doesn't really make sense to auto layout. So it would throw a similar message. So now we can run it again, now that we've happily added our policy button to the view hierarchy, and there it is. And remember, now we've used the bottom anchor equal to the safe area. So this home bar swiping thing that you use to go into multitasking mode or switch between apps, that this here is the safe area on an iPhone 11 and X, and all these phones without a home button. Yeah, so our layout is kind of broken in landscape now. But if we were on an older device that had a physical home button down here, then the safe area is actually non-existent, I believe. It's right at the bottom of the screen. So it's good to use safe area, to work around the notch and to work around the home indicator down here on the newer iPhones. So we have a problem, and that is to find out how much data we steal from you. Let's say that the design got approval to go ahead with this text in our app. So we went and entered it into our label, and lo and behold, it is now being clipped. And because our rule was to center this label, we didn't define a leading or trailing. It's clipping on both sides now. This is not a great strategy. We should move back to perhaps the leading trailing strategy that we saw before, which was similar to this one, I guess. So we'll just steal the code from up here, put it down here. We'll say the policies leading and trailing is equal to the views leading and trailing with the horizontal padding metric. Now we don't want less than or equal to because we are wanting to center this label. So if we said less than or equal to, it's disappeared now, hasn't it? Is there errors in the console? There is no errors in the console. Center, did I? Wait. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to undo. Let's see. Yeah, I deleted the bottom anchor accidentally instead of the X anchor. Oh, my delete key is not working. Oh, it's all on. That's weird. Okay. Cool. Okay, so I've deleted the correct constraint. There you go. So now, because the label is too long, it's getting its text clipped, which is preferable to have 3 dots in the middle of the label rather than letting the text run off either side of the screen. We've got our beautiful padding equal up here. I don't think that's equal. Actually, you know what it is, isn't it? Am I using the wrong trailing padding? What is going on? Is this space the same as this space? Always second guess yourself. It's not, is it? I'm just going crazy. Yeah, so those two are aligned. These look aligned. And I would assume that in that case that this label has some extra padding in its intrinsic size here that is making it look like it's aligned up here. Let's take a peek at that in the view debugger. Yeah, look at that. I was right. The button itself is this big, and then the label already has some padding that Apple has given it, and then the text itself is, I guess, because it's left aligned text potentially in the label. Anyway, that's what's happening. Our constraints are good, and I'm going to label fixing that out of scope. of this tutorial because already it's looking bad. So let's change read out privacy policy. Let's get rid of that, and we should see it nicely centered. And then, oh, it is not centered. You know why? It's this less than or equal to that I left in, which I had a point to make about that. Yeah, so that less than and equal to is aligning. So if we were to make this equal to, we know what would happen, right? It would stretch the label horizontally to fill the screen, and it would look centered nicely because the text is centered. Yep, so there, our entire button is that wide. Which, you know what, it might be okay if we want this area to be tappable as well. I think in the case of the login button, and I've probably been a bit excessive with the size of my login button, but in that case I think it's cool to make it tappable all kind of around. But in the case of the privacy policy, because it's such a wide button already, there's probably no need to make it tappable out here. That kind of makes less sense to me than this being tappable. Talk to the designers what they want, I guess. But the point I want to make is that we can use less than or equal to, and I think this might have to be greater than because we're going in the other direction, to still keep everything centered nicely. No. Why do I keep wanting to do that? Keep wanting to do that. Cool. And what size do we think that this? So this label is bunched nicely. There is some constraint issue appearing here. Horizontal position is ambiguous. Yeah, I know. Oh, the point I was making was we need the X anchor to center it, but we can use the less than or equal to on either side to allow it to shrink but still stay centered, but then not grow over the edge of the screen. So policy button dot center X anchor dot constraint equal to no, it should be equal to the view.center X, like so. And maybe I was right for once about the greater than or equal to. Let's find out if there's any issues here. No, there are no issues. Cool, so now our policy label is not tappable. It is tappable here. Why is that? Because it is this big. Is it confused? What is this? Is it working? It is. So now our label is fixed in the center of the screen, and it can't grow past the edge of the screen if the text was really long. And I'm scared to run this because I've been wrong a few seconds ago. There we go. So now it's truncating itself in the middle rather than clipping off the side of the screen, and it's only allowing the minimum area to be tappable. All right. Is this constraint really necessary? Ask yourself, because remember, we don't need to say leading and trailing. There we go. Still looking good. Still nothing's tappable. So we've made our view a bit more efficient. So let's see. What else have we got? Okay, so we've done our basic layout. That's point 1 here. So optimizing and best practices, I think we've covered everything that I was planning to talk about. That being, don't don't over constrain things, even like don't say the same rule twice, like we just saw with the x-axis and then setting both the leading and trailing, and also fixing views positions to the view geographically above them where possible, rather than repeating yourself with the paddings every time, just so that if we want to move everything around, we can just move the top view. Say we want to move it up here, then everything's going to come with it if we've anchored it to the views above it. Okay, so reusing the text fields and titles. So you'll notice that these two, I guess, UI groups of elements are pretty much the same. They just have different text inside of their labels. So here comes the power of writing our constraints in code. We can define a single view that contains those two views and reuse that and just change the value of the label. So to do that, we're going to create a new file and we'll call it, I don't know, custom, we'll call it a titled text field. How about that? That works for me. We need to import UIKit so we can have access to all the UI objects, and we'll say titled text field is a class that, well, it actually extends from UIView. It's going to contain a text field and a label. So I'm going to jump back to this file and copy perhaps a title and a field that we're happy with. Oops. Excuse me. Okay, so we don't need to worry about that. We'll call this title and we'll call this one field. So we create an init function so that we can create initialize the class. We need to call super.init with frame, and we'll give it a 0 frame because we're using auto layout to define the frame. And now Xcode is complaining that we're missing this initializer, which is actually the initializer that gets called when you are using a storyboard or a nib. We don't need to worry about that, so we're just going to crash the app if this function is ever called, because it's never going to be called because we're not inserting this class as the custom class of a view in a storyboard. Cool. So let's create a setup function, or let's create a layout function and call it from the init. So init is only going to be called once, which is what we spoke about earlier, making sure that your that your layout is only done once. And now we can start laying out these elements in terms of within this titled text field view. And you know what? We should probably rename this to say view at the end so that we know it's not a text field when we're reading the class elsewhere in our code. It's actually a view that contains a text field and a title. So we don't need to say view.addSubView because we are a view. Self is a view. So we're essentially here saying self.addSubView. Add the title. Add the field. And NSLayout constraint dot activate with our array of constraints that we're going to build. And we can probably grab some of these constraints from here and reuse them. For example, that looks like a block of constraints that talks about a field position. I'm going to paste them in here and we'll clean them up. So the title leading anchor is equal to the field leading anchor. So instead of this, we're just going to make it equal to self.leading anchor, or this view's leading anchor, flush with the edge. We're going to make our trailing anchor less than or equal to the view's trailing anchor, like so. And then for the field, we're going to make the top anchor equal to the bottom of the title with our 4 pixel space. And of course we can create, we should create another metrics struct up here for reused constants. And we're going to make our field bottom anchor equal to, because now we're not positioning in terms of the view controller, we're creating our own little ecosystem here. So we can't say equal to the center Y. We'll just make it equal to our bottom anchor. And then the leading anchor is equal to our leading, which is the same as the title up here, and the trailing is equal to the trailing. And now I'm not making it equal to the titles leading and trailing anchors. I could be doing that, but 2 reasons. One, we're doing this efficiency thing here where we're letting the title shrink on the horizontal axis if it can, and 2, this little ecosystem is the block that I'm talking about that can be moved around easily. So I'm not going to worry too much about my constraints here. It's going to be very, very lightweight and easy to change, and because we're going to create 2 of these later on, if we change it to one place, it's going to change it in both places. We don't want this constant. And actually our trailing anchor should be equal to, our field's trailing anchor should be equal to our trailing anchor. And now Xcode is behaving itself with the syntax highlighting. All right, so this view that we've just created hopefully looks something like, or it could be any size, we don't know because we're not defining, well, we actually are defining our height. Well, not yet, are we? We've missed one thing. So the field top is equal to the title's bottom with the 4 spacing, but now we need to specify that the title's top is constrained to our top anchor. So this view that we've just created, it actually has a height, and that height is the height of the text field plus 4, because remember we've added this 4, plus the height of the label, plus any spacing we've added at the bottom and top. And remember, we haven't added padding, so this is 0 and this is 0. So our little titled text field view here has a natural height. So it means in our class, in our view controller class, when we use it, we won't need to tell it what height to be because it's taking its height from its contents. But the width, there's no defined width here. It's going to be very stretchy. So we'll need to tell it the width inside of our view controller. So let's go and use it and see what happens. I'm going to jump into our view controller, and now we can delete we need our title, so that says welcome. We don't need all of these. And we don't need, now look how useful it was to have our comments here. We can just, they're gone. That's gone. So we're reducing code in our view controller slowly. So let's say username view is a titled text field view. Titled text field view, we create it and we return the view. And now we remember inside of this class we have a title label and a field, so we can set the text of the title label. Like so. And we can say view.translates auto resizing mask into constraints is false. Or if we don't want to do that here, we can actually do it here, for example. And remember now, view is self. We can do it here, and it means that we don't have to do it out here. Is it confusing? Yes, because if we forget to do it here, then we have to do it out here, blah, blah, blah. You need to decide with your team what's best for you. Just so I don't have to repeat it twice, I'm going to be putting it in here. Our password view. Cool. And so now we'll start to lay them out. So remember, we should add them to the view hierarchy. And so now we need to decide on the rules. So let's do the same rules as before. We'll fix the bottom of the username to the center of the view. So we'll say username view dot bottom anchor constraint equal to view dot center x. Sorry, center y anchor. Yep. So it vertically it is constrained. And what is wrong with this? Why isn't it coloring? We'll leave that. Maybe it's because of this. What if I was to? Yeah. Okay. So that's highlighted nicely. And so we'll need our width, our leading and trailing. So username view dot leading anchor is a constraint equal to the view dot leading anchor with the constant. I think we had metrics dot big horizontal padding. Maybe we'll use the center X technique. Center X anchor constraint equal to the view.center X anchor. And yeah, we should reorder these lines of code, swap them around. So yeah, that keyboard shortcut option, command, and the square brackets is just essentially moves lines of code up and down. Very handy. Yeah, I mean, I like to see my code like that. So we've laid out this field, and I don't think it's ambiguous. Yeah, we've got all our constraints we need for the vertical axis and all our constraints we need for the horizontal axis. So I'm going to copy this like so, and just for a change, something different, we'll make this password views top anchor equal to the center Y anchor. See what happens. Might look better. And that should be correct. I don't know why it's not highlighting. Because there's no comma here. And there's no comma here. And now we can start saying for the top of, yeah, the top of the login button is equal to the bottom of the password view with our same constant. I'll run this code. Hopefully we see, yeah, pretty much the same thing, except there's no space between these views. And that's because, yeah, the top of the password is equal to the center Y and the bottom of the username is equal to the center Y. So a good thing we can do here is say constant is equal to the metrics vertical padding, which is what we were using before. The distance we wanted between these views was the vertical padding. And we can divide that vertical padding by 2 to get half of it, so half the vertical padding. So now we've moved, so we've moved the password view down from the center line, the center Y line, by half the vertical padding. So that you can see that there. And now we want to move it up, move this view up by half the vertical padding, and that keeps those two views centered very nicely. Is the vertical padding really what we were using? That's 4. We must have been, I can't remember now. Did we have a constant? Let's make a big vertical padding. of, I don't know, 40. There you go. Let's run that. So now our password view should be 20. It is not. Did I make a mistake? Oh no, I didn't change this to big vertical padding. Yep, so now our password view is 20 down from the center line, and we'll move our username up 20 from the center line, so up half the big vertical padding. And the benefit of doing the half is that we can actually just go and change the spacing by adjusting this, and then we just do the math later on. So center the bottom anchor, center Y constant will be this, and I think we're going to need a negative because we're doing the bottom anchors. So let's see what that looks like. Yeah, it looks exactly the same. So we'll put a negative in front of it. And now we've got our 40 spacing between the two views, and we've reused our code. We haven't done the layout of setting this title label on above the field twice, which we had here. Instead, we've extracted it into this layout function inside of this class. So if we have a look at the view hierarchy, we'll see that we now have this extra view, this extra region around our title and field, and that is the titled text field view that we just created. So this is how you start to reuse your code with constraints. That wouldn't really be possible with a storyboard. All right, so something else you can do is use a stack view to layout, and a stack view essentially just grabs any number of views and spaces them out for you. We'll give a quick example of that. So instead of doing all this logic, because it is all vertical layout logic in the middle of the view controller, we may as well use a stack view. So let's say stack UIStackView, and in fact we should not call this stack because that's confusing. We'll call it centered stack, and this centered stack contains our username view, and then our password view, and then our login button, like so. And so now we can delete our login button and this code for the fields. We'll just lay out our stack view with the leading anchor equal to the views leading anchor with our metrics dot horizontal padding, and we can use our center X technique for that. So we're starting to lay it out again. Essentially what we're doing is creating a stack view to encompass these views like this, and the stack view will do the vertical layout for us and the spacing too, if it's feeling nice. So yeah, we've just defined this space and this space, but this space we've defined it in an implicit way because we've told it to align its center X. All right. Now we can just say center Y is equal to the view center Y, so it's going to be centered perfectly in our screen. So yeah, our stack view it contains these subviews. So now we just need to define a few things on the stack view. Centered stack dot alignment equals, sorry, not dot alignment, dot axis. So we want a vertical stack view, and the centered stack view dot spacing should be our metrics dot big vertical padding. Maybe spacing is a better word. Anyway, let's see what happens. I have forgotten something, and it should complain. Actually, I've forgotten two things. So I have forgotten to add the stack view to our view hierarchy. So I'm going to move these lines up actually, and just group my code nicely like that. So that was one thing I forgot, and I think the other thing I've forgotten is to set the translates auto resizing mask. And yeah, you can see there's some conflicts and there's something going on up here. It's very confused about where to position itself. So we must not forget to say centered stack does not translate its auto resizing masks. And something has gone wrong as well. But we've lost the warnings in the console, so that's good. So this just means something in our logic is wrong. Let's take a look over here. There's a bunch of issues. And they're all bunched up on top of each other, it looks like. All right. Not to worry. Maybe it shouldn't be an alignment issue, because the stack view has all these rules, such as so this is the rule for the axis that is not its main axis. So if it's a vertical stack view and we say center, then it's going to try and center things horizontally, I believe. Not useful to us. There is a distribution thing. So for example, we could say everything inside of this stack view needs to have equal spacing. But I don't think that's the issue here. Oh, silly me. We've told the stack view that it is managing these three views. But actually, we've gone and, after telling the stack view it's managing them, we've gone and grabbed them and put them in our own view hierarchy, which is wrong, isn't it? Actually, we want the policy button, but the login button, the username and password should not be manually added to our hierarchy because they're inside of the stack view. And finally, our stack view is looking good. It's reduced the layout code significantly here. It still looks like we want it to look. We can take a look in the debugger. You can see now there's another view, and this is the stack view that is containing our three views. And because remember, we told it what spacing we wanted. That spacing is happening between our views. We can do fun things like change it to be a horizontal stack view if we want to, and see what happens. Cool. So now our username and password and login button are ordered horizontally. So you can see how powerful a stack view can be for layout. All right, the final thing for today that I want to talk about is moving layout out of the view controller. So your view controller is generally going to get very big, even if we're using architectures that aim in reducing the size of our view controller. It's kind of inevitable because this is the entry point for the UI. So what I like to do is create a view class that relates to the view controller. So I'll create a new file, and I'll name it something like view controller plus content view. We need UI kit, and I'll create an extension on the view controller, and inside of this extension I'll create a class called content view, and it is a UIView. So we'll need an init function. Just init, please. We'll call super.init with a 0 frame because we're using auto layout. and we'll create our layout function. Actually, we won't even do that. Yes, we will. Sorry, I'm thinking too far ahead. Create a layout function, and we'll call it. So this is looking very much like our title text field view. It's just a very good way of structuring your views. So in here, we're going to do all our ViewController layout instead of having it in the ViewController class. So I'm going to grab pretty much everything, to be honest. Grab all of that, put it in here. And all our layout code, I'm going to grab it and put it in here. The only difference is view represents the ViewController's view, and remember, when we're inside of a view class, we don't have that property that we are a view, self is a view. Excuse me, hiccuping, burping. Yeah, we are a view, so essentially this is saying self.addSubView. So we need to go and remove all the view dots, which is good. It's reducing our code. I'm going to do that. That's looking good. I'm going to close this side pane. And yeah, so we've moved all our logic into the content view, and so now we'll just create that content view inside of the ViewController. We can even just do that. We don't need to do any custom setup logic on it, because we are going to be smart about things and say self.translates auto resizing mask is false. So we just create the view, assign it to a variable, and in our layout, we'll activate some constraints. And don't forget, we need to add the content view to our own subview as our own subview. And now we'll do our final constraints for the day, which will be content view dot leading anchor constraint equal to the leading anchor. Hey, I'm confused where I am. The view is leading anchor, and we're going to need this for top, left, bottom, and right. So leading, trailing, not trait collection. Come on, Xcode. Top, and bottom. So essentially, we're just making the content view fill the entire ViewController's view. And so now, look how small our ViewController is. There's space for all the other logic that we're going to need when passing data into the views at a later stage in this project. And all our layout logic is in the content view class. And we can still access the button if we need it. So if we needed to know when the login button was tapped, we can still go content view dot login button dot add target self action, etc., etc. That's out of the scope of this tutorial. But yeah, so now we've got a nice small view controller, and we've got a content view with all our layout logic and zero app logic, and it looks exactly the same. Only difference being there is now another view in the hierarchy. This one that is taking up the entire ViewController's view. All right, that was really long. Hopefully it was useful. Yeah, good luck with your constraints.